Welcome to our Think Big series brought to you by PSG. I'm Gustav Kruger, Group Financial Manager at PSG. PSG is a leading financial services group with an extensive national footprint in South Africa and a presence in Namibia. We've been in operation since 1998 and pride ourselves on providing a bigger picture approach to our clients' financial needs, from asset and wealth management to short-term insurance. We offer clients a wide range of insurance and investment products based on comprehensive advice. Our clients benefit from access to proprietary products and solutions, as well as a comprehensive list of third-party products. The Think Big series is a collection of dialogues with leading speakers hosted by award-winning financial journalist Bruce Whitfield. We aim to bring our audience independent insights that help them formulate their own opinions on some of the country's most pressing issues. Uncertainty and challenges continue to be abound, but armed with knowledge, we are better equipped to chart the way forward. Our social media campaign is #ThinkBigPSG. This series is free, shareable, and open to anyone interested, whether you are a PSG client or not. The Solidarity Fund was created following the COVID-19 pandemic to help drive a consolidated response from the general public, civil society, public and private sectors. The fund's response focuses on health and vaccine rollout initiatives and humanitarian and behavioral change projects. PSG, as part of our response to assist in minimizing the impact of COVID-19 on society, also donated to the Solidarity Fund. I'm therefore really looking forward to today's discussion. In today's session, Bruce talks to Tandi Nzimande, CEO of the Solidarity Fund, about her career journey, current projects, and what comes next for the fund. Prior to her role at the fund, Tandi was the CFO of Chapter 1 Innovation Brokerage, a business model research and development firm. She's a chartered accountant and started her post-articles career as a corporate finance advisor at Deutsche Bank. Following that, she acquired and ran a small business in the postal and courier industry for 4 years. During that period, she did work for WDB Investment Holdings, a women's empowerment company, where she eventually spent 14 years as the Chief Financial Officer. She is a board member of First Rand, a trustee of the First Rand Empowerment Foundation, and a fellow of the African Leadership Initiative. So without further delay, over to you, Bruce.
Gustav, thank you very much indeed. Tandi, good to see you. How long have you been in the job as Chief Executive of the fund?
Almost a year now, Bruce. Almost a year. Started at the end of October last year. Unbelievable, actually.
No, it's been a huge ride, of course. I mean, it was a 3-week lockdown, and then it was all going to be over. We've learned since then, of course, that nothing could have been further from the truth. And what I think amazed most South Africans was the speed with which the fund was created. And it was quite extraordinary to see in those early days the huge funds coming in from big name donors, and then, of course, from many, many thousands of companies and individuals as well.
No, it was an exceptional feat that was achieved at that time. The number of people who just were like hands on deck. We're locked down. We've got to do something. We're facing something we've never faced together, and we've got to face it together. Those with resources in terms of money has brought in tremendous amounts of money, and tremendous may not necessarily mean large amounts in terms of what the person is able to give, but tremendous to that person's purse. So there were those who gave significant amounts of money. We had a donation of R1 billion, and that was amazing. And we also had donations of R1, R2 on our crowdfunding platforms. And that was just amazing. Just people saying, we want to help. We are facing something. And
perhaps what was more extraordinary than just the money was just how corporate South Africa stepped up to the plate as well. And people like Gloria Serobe and A.D. Enthoven and many, many others put up their hands and said, what can we do? We're not busy enough, so let's give more hours in the day and volunteer. And it was that spirit of volunteerism, which I think was the thing that made it stand out right from the very beginning.
That was extraordinary. the Gloria Sirobe, A.D. Enthoven, Martin Kingston, a whole lot of people from a whole variety of companies. It was just people saying, a whole lot of CEOs who will remain unnamed because there were quite a number of them, who just put up their hands and put in the time. And I mean, I recall talking to the team that was there at the beginning, and they were just saying, look, the one guy was like, I didn't see my front door for 3 weeks solid. Just never got there. Because it was essentially almost 24 hours on the clock. It was that hectic at the beginning. It was that hectic. Thankfully, it has slowed down since then. I don't think I would have survived a year of it. And I'm sure this is why Nomkita needed a break at the end of October. She was like, no.
No, exactly right. I mean, and again, at the beginning, it was a fund that was there to bridge a gap, I think, between what the state could do and what the public sector could do. And it was this wonderful meeting of the minds and meeting of need and meeting of an opportunity to collaborate that was realized after years and years and years of government and business and labor shouting at each other, occasionally talking to each other in loud voices, even sometimes being civil. Suddenly there was a mutual goal, there was a mutual enemy, and everybody had to band together to collaborate. And I think that sets up potential models for the future, doesn't it?
It definitely does, Bruce. I think what it did was it showed what was possible when actually we're all looking at the same thing and we're all reaching for the same thing. And more often than not, we are actually reaching for the same thing, just in different ways. So this was a demonstration effect almost. That if there's positives that we're going to pull out of the COVID experience, I think this is one huge positive for South Africa, where business alongside government, alongside civil society, alongside labor, everybody working together, because we can.
But unfortunately, what happens in times like this, Tandi, is, and we know it, whether it be the 1995 Rugby World Cup, whether it be hosting the World Cup in 2010, whether it be COVID, is we all come together in this sort of miracle opportunity, and we succeed and we excel and we shoot the lights out, we pat ourselves and sometimes even each other on the back. And not long after that, we kind of forget the lessons and we go back to our old bad habits. Is there anything that has happened through this process that becomes permanent?
I think one of the changes, I hope, one of the changes that will come will be in the way that the conversations continue in it. Like, one of the things that is different, I think, about COVID is that it, unfortunately, but in this particular case, fortunately, has had a longer period in the space. And as a result, the conversations have had to hold on, and there have had to be positive conversations of collaboration rather than confrontation, which I think is a very different flavor, and has continued now for almost a year in the COVID space.
This process, the Solidarity Fund, was set up with all the very best intentions, of course, and people donated their time and donated their money. And not long into the process, we start seeing the corruption and the frauds happening in PPE fraud and all of this sort of stuff, the tender frauds. And we all know what happened in the health departments with digital vibes, for example. Those relationships, I think, have been quite tested.
Tested very, very hard. Tested very, very hard. I think I'd be surprised if there wasn't a single, if the whole of South Africa wasn't just heartbroken, anguished, angry at the fact that there are people who would take advantage in a situation such as we had found ourselves, really under threat by something that none of us can control. And yet there are people who feel that in that kind of situation, their pockets are more important than people's lives. So yes, it has been a testing space. We have been very, very fortunate that in terms of the Solidarity Fund role, we have been able to lean quite heavily on the governance that was put into place right at the beginning. And that governance has actually proven that it held with rigor. And the Solidarity Fund was not found wanting in that space. There was no corruption within the Solidarity Fund.
And that's all well and good, but South Africans are, I think, quite resilient. I think we're quite tough. We anticipate that there will be a level of corruption in many levels of society, but surely it has undermined the goodwill that existed at the beginning of this process. People go, well, I don't care who I donate money to. I can't keep throwing good money after bad.
No, we've encountered that. We've encountered that. So I'll give you an example of that kind of experience from the Solidarity Fund point of view. Was somebody who was saying, let's call it maybe February, and we were looking to fundraise for the vaccine rollout. And the response was, you guys gave money to COVID, nothing, to COVAX, nothing's come out of that. You're wasting money. We're not sure about you. Fortunately, they came around, but it just meant that the conversations around work that is really important did become much harder because of the corruption of other people. The environment changed.
How did you turn that conversation around? What did you do that brought people back to the center to say, hold on a second, all right, fine, yes, there's been corruption, but it's been in isolated pockets, mostly public sector. How did you manage to turn that opinion around? Because it was a big job.
It was a big job. Fortunately, I have great colleagues, so there were a few conversations. But essentially, it was to demonstrate that their understanding of what COVAX did and when COVAX was due to deliver was perhaps mistaken. It was also back to that point I was making about governance, and saying that within the Solidarity Fund, the work that we're doing and the rigor that we have and the reporting we do is to ensure that people are kept apprised of what we're doing, and we're transparent as much as possible in how we do things. So a lot of people don't appreciate that we actually have a lot of reports on our website, fairly detailed reports. Maybe people don't enjoy reading such detailed reports, but I think it does give some reassurance when there is doubt that there is a place where I can go and look. And we're very open. We're happy to talk to people. And I think that was essentially the turnaround. We opened up, and the gentleman in question spoke to a few people in the stable and was able to conclude that his money will still be well spent.
There's always a need for a solidarity fund in South Africa. We always have humanitarian crises of various levels of desperation, whether it be child hunger, whether it be ill-performing schools, whether it be a COVID-19 outbreak. Is the vision to keep the solidarity fund going almost as if a support mechanism for when we really get into trouble, or is there a termination date in mind for the solidarity fund?
It's an ongoing question. It's an ongoing question, Bruce. So the Solidarity Fund was formed with a particular crisis in mind, which is the COVID pandemic. We have since seen the July unrest, and that mandate was added to the Solidarity Fund to respond to that particular incident. At this stage, I think it's hard to put a line in the sand and say the Solidarity Fund will continue one way or another. However, we are comfortable that either way, there are always people who are well placed to respond to, particularly the crises that are unfortunately more sustained if we can have a sustained crisis. I think that the Solidarity Fund played a very particular role in a space which was an unknown space. The COVID pandemic was so out of the ordinary that a specific response fund was required. So I think the board continues.
The COVID crisis itself, Tandi, the COVID crisis itself is not the crisis. Nearly 90,000 people have died. Some people have got terribly sick. Long COVID is atrocious. Speak to people who are struggling with it. But it is sort of just the beginning. If we look at what's happened to our unemployment rate since COVID, it's gone from disastrous to catastrophic, 44% in real terms unemployment in South Africa. GDP rates are recovering, but we're not going to get back to 2019 levels much before even, if you're very ambitious, middle of 2023, probably 2024. We're running up government debt. We'll have by 24-25, probably 5 trillion rand in government debt. It just feels that the real crisis here is the consequence of COVID, the consequence of the slowdown, the inability to dig ourselves out of the hole quickly is perhaps the long-running crisis, the long-running consequence of COVID. Perhaps in there is a long-term role for something like the Solidarity Fund. Would you agree?
I would, Bruce. I mean, I think the impact of the pandemic has just been terrible. I have no real proper word to describe it in the way it has impacted people in so many different ways. I am conscious that we're part of the global experience here, and that global experience, others have come through. Particularly the wealthier nations have come through. Nobody's come through unscathed, but they will recover much quicker. I think we will have scarring for a long time to come. And in that, I think the responses will come not from single organizations, but we actually have to take collective responsibility. And we have to be in the spaces where we can make a difference. It is really important that we do.
Collective responsibility is a wonderful, it's not my problem solution to everything. There's a former registrar of banks at the Reserve Bank many years ago, a guy called Errol Kruger, in the days when banks loved joint ventures and people were doing weird and wonderful joint ventures with each other in the hope that it would generate future revenues. And he said, you know what, joint ventures are about samenwerken, working together. And you know what the problem is with samenwerken? Ons is saam en jy werk. We're together and you work. Both parties think the other one is actually going to do the work. And that's the trouble with saying we must take collective responsibility. It sounds very nice, and it is true. But this crisis and after this crisis needs real leadership. We're not getting it from politics. Politicians are too busy fighting with each other and trying to, the game of one-upmanship of politics. Surely there's a long-term place for, gifted the givers can't do everything. There's a long-term place for a collaborative corporate effort.
I think there is, Bruce. I think you're right. I think you're right. There is opportunity for people to hide when you go into a collective space, responsibility space. I think corporates will come together, and I think platforms such as B4SA may or may not continue. I'm not sure what their plans are. I know they disbanded and they came back together again. So I think that kind of platform will be critical in responding. I agree with you that we have a paucity of leadership, most unfortunately, and the green shoots that we have sometimes are just beyond our sight, so we can't see that leadership. So we must have a beacon head that leads. I'm not sure, though, that that is necessarily the Solidarity Fund. I think, as I was saying, B4SA and business organizations might actually have be better placed to lead on something like that. And where the Solidarity Fund, I think, is important is the collaborative space, because when I'm talking about businesses, then I'm just talking about the business leadership. But I think it's quite important that, as much as there's a lot of trouble and a lot of difficulty in the public sector, you want to bring the public sector along because it has significant reach, and you want to bring labor and civil society along. So I think we might even go back to something, although, truth be told, I don't know if it yielded anything. But if you recall, some time back, there was what was it called now? I've forgotten what it was called, but it was an effort around, initially, actually, most recently, it was about work, about employment. There was a platform that came together. Bruce, you're gonna have.
I know what you're thinking of. It's that thing. We're having this middle-aged moment, but it's okay. Most of our viewers will have this moment as well, and they're shouting at our screens. And I wish they would just pop up a little message that would tell us. But it was basically creating youth employment opportunities. The YES service, the youth employment.
The YES service, and
61,000 jobs opportunities.
The
created.
Job Summit. It's called the Job Summit.
But again, this is the big political dream. So the president appoints an entire team to run the Yes campaign. And he says, within 3 years, we'll create 1 million jobs. And that's lovely. And that's a nice, big, bold political statement, but it's not grounded in reality. And that's why I just look to a future, and I wonder whether or not this greater collaboration of reality checks, of opportunities, of great opportunism that the private sector brings. And it's not always, the private sector is far from perfect and far from blameless in many crisis situations. However, what we have seen is that we're better off together than we are tearing each other's eyes out and stabbing each other in the back. I think that much is absolutely clear from the Solidarity Fund experiment.
No, I think that much has been well demonstrated. And I think I feel like in some ways the Solidarity Fund is a tiny microcosm of NEDLAC, where people come together, and there, I think, because there's a focused objective as opposed to 100 objectives that are everybody's trying to achieve, you're able to then move forward. And maybe that's the template. Maybe that's the template where you have a specific organization formulated on the template as a Solidarity Fund, but focused on a particular thing. So as opposed to trying to solve for COVID, trying to solve for hunger, trying to solve for unemployment, trying to solve for water crisis and anything else, you just focused on the one thing. And so it is that particular organization will be carrying through that particular objective, and not getting distracted by perhaps other objectives.
The Reserve Bank governor was talking at the 100th anniversary of the Reserve Bank just fairly recently. I think it was probably August or September or thereabouts, speaking in Stellenbosch, and he gave a very long and very detailed speech in which he was talking about the success of inflation targeting and the need to tighten the inflation target. But in that speech, and it was a fairly long speech, about an hour long, there was one line that leapt out at me and bit me really, really hard. I think it was something like, if everything is a priority, nothing is a priority. And I'm sure you've learned that through the Solidarity Fund as well, because we have so many fires that spring up in South Africa all the time. And we take all of our resources and we spread them really, really, really thinly. We take all our best people, we put one person in every job, and nothing works because we don't target our issues nearly effectively enough. Would you agree?
I do think that does become a problem. You do need to have that targeted approach. when we try to address too many things all at once, we'll lose the impact of the effort because it's too diffused. So I very much favor being able to prioritize, being clear about that. It doesn't mean that other things don't matter. It just means that if you're gonna make headway, you're gonna have to pick on one thing and move that first, and then other things will move in the slipstream of what you've managed to achieve in the first instance. But when you try to achieve, it's if you're a student, if you have a child, your child trying to achieve 100% in everything, it's not likely to work. However, when they get that confidence from having achieved that first 100%, then they've got a bit more energy to put into the second and the third subject, and so on. And it's pretty much the same in life.
There are lots of fabulous TED Talks. I saw one recently of an American medical doctor, an emergency room doctor, and she was talking about how people should cope with their stresses and cope with stress better, and lessons from the emergency room, and this idea of triage, where somebody's going to die, you deal with them first. Somebody's bleeding, you staunch the bleeding and then get to them next. And if somebody's got a bit of a sniffle, you maybe give them bananas and make the wait. And in South Africa, we tend to do that. We tend to focus on the big emergencies, and we don't focus on the second and third tier stuff nearly enough until it becomes an emergency later on. And this comes down to a failure of planning. We've got this wonderful document created about 10 years ago called the National Development Plan. And I know that it exists because I saw its logo on my vaccination certificate. But that's the only evidence I have seen of the National Development Plan, probably since Trevor Manuel left politics in disgust and went into the corporate sector. Here we've got the opportunity to use this crisis and to say, how do we reconfigure the plan? Every other country has a plan, a 5-year plan, a 10-year plan. China does plans in 100 or 1,000 years, whatever they do, but they do serious long-term planning, and they'll deviate along the way, but they know what the goal is. Do we have a goal? Do we have a plan? And to your mind, Tandi?
Do we have a plan? To your very comment, yes, we do. We've got the NDP.
Have you seen it?
Do we use our plan? Do we reference our plan? I hesitate to say yes to that. I think if we did use our plan, and we were very disciplined about it, because I think that's where planning really comes in. You'll be distracted by various things, and sometimes necessarily so. The COVID pandemic you cannot plan for. So it will take you off course. But if you are clear about what the course is, and if you make that course clear to many people, then we're all clear that that's what we're working towards. If however you draft a plan and you put it on a shelf, then you're as good as having no plan. And at the moment, that's how it feels like in large measure. In some measures, you can, there's a consistency, like for instance, on industrialization and that sort of thing. But in large measure, one just doesn't see the NDP coming through in guiding what we're doing as a country.
Dare I suggest, because it was created with collective responsibility in mind, it was a case of, it's a guideline, it's a suggestion, it's a route map, which we hope to take. It had Trevor Manuel as a champion, but without any authority. Does the National Development Plan need a Pravin Gordon, SARS type focus, and somebody who's got the authority to go and bash heads together, to make people collaborate, make people work together towards a common goal?
So I think back to the template of the Solidarity Fund, I think it would work exceptionally well if, for instance, you've got the planning I'll call it department in the presidency. You match that up with other people in business and in civil society and in labor, and you then you have a consistent, measured pace about how we're doing. What are we seeking to achieve this year? This is our 10-year plan. What are we doing this year? What are we doing in 5 years? Are we moving towards that particular? I think you could get that going, Bruce, but it has to be actively managed. It's not a plan. No plan can work except when it's actively managed.
And is led, to back to the point of leadership and absolute leadership, because I just wonder whether in 10 years' time we're streets ahead, or whether we're still anguishing about why the rest of the world moved on and we didn't. Same as the global financial crisis of 2008 and all the way through till 2010. We bounced back from that very nicely because we didn't have any fundamental issues in South Africa at the time, and we did well. But then we bumbled along. And whenever you would talk to somebody like Pravin Gordhan, who was finance minister at the time, he'd say it's a global financial crisis. It's external. However, we were imploding internally. And it comes down to that leadership of ensuring that we get a future. And that then leads to the structure of the fund, the Solidarity Fund. It requires donors and donations. Is there any way of creating a sustainable structure? A structure which then sort of almost becomes self-sustaining into the future, that allows it then to continue to exist? Because I can only imagine that donor fatigue is set in a very serious way, because that's just the way things are. It's quite a natural response.
No, it is a natural response, and given the difficulties in the economy, a lot of people are cutting back on spend that is not core business related. So we've definitely encountered donor fatigue. In terms of self-sustaining, the only model I have actually come across which has worked, bar those that are, of course, if there was somebody who would give an endowment, that would be a self-sustaining, or a few people who would choose to endow the fund. That becomes a self-sustaining mechanism. The only other mechanism has actually come from where I used to work previously in a BE company at WDB. So WDB was started as a trust, working with poor rural women. When BEE came along, the founders had the vision that BEE could be used to benefit the very poor. And so it was that BEE deals were entered into. And so it was that a dividend stream was now part of the makeup. And it takes some time. I mean, it takes about, in a BEE space, some good 5-10 years before you see the actual financial benefits coming through. But that was a model that made WDB Trust more self-sustaining. And I don't know if if shareholders are up to that sort of give without the legislative backing, if you wish, that comes from a BEE framework.
What do you think have been the biggest successes? What can we take out of the Solidarity Fund lessons that we can learn that somehow we can utilize better into the future?
I think by far for me it's collaboration. Focused collaboration for me is by far the biggest lesson. I mean, we've worked closely, and I mean, relationships are never easy. So it's not that the relationships have been easy, but the focus has been clear. So alongside government, in the good and the bad times, alongside the private sector, negotiating hard for certain things that we may or may not need, alongside labor, alongside communities and civil society. That the model, I think, of the board of the Solidarity Fund, I think has worked exceptionally well, because what you do is you bring in not just the loudest voices, but you bring in the diversity of voices that enable you to hit the best solution. Because sometimes business will have an idea that this will work best in a particular situation, but in fact, they don't take into consideration because they haven't been exposed to the living conditions or the experience of people. So actually that solution that on paper looks fantastic, in real life just doesn't work out. But if you've got the right voices around the table, you end up with a solution that is best for the situation in which South Africa exists.
Do you worry that the lessons that you've learned from the Solidarity Fund sort of eventually comes to the end of its term, because I'm not sure that there is a long-term commitment to it, that it's done its job, it's ticked the boxes and everyone's very happy, and one day you close the doors and the volunteers go back to their day jobs, they go back home before midnight, they get reacquainted with their children, the dog doesn't bark at them when they get home, and we go back to that sort of normal once again, but that we forget, and we then just go back to business as usual, which is lots of sniping, pointing fingers and screaming and shouting at each other.
The unfortunate truth is that is a possibility, because I think human beings and South Africans have shown time and again that they don't necessarily learn from history, no matter how sharp, no matter how bad, no matter how good. We seem to want to go through experiences time and again. So I think it would be an absolute pity if the template of the Solidarity Fund was lost. I do think that there's a possibility, unless we can embed it in some of the planning processes that we're talking about.
So how do we achieve that? Let's wrap up with that. Because, from this, we it's just so awful that the likelihood is COVID eventually dissipates to a point where we don't have to wear masks anymore, and we can go back to having parties and gatherings and all that sort of stuff. But that we do forget very valuable lessons, and the lessons of collaboration, the lessons of teamwork, the lessons of in it together is better than try to sort of muddle about in the shallows all the time. What do we need to do, Tandi, to your mind? How would you like to see this legacy continue and be fulfilled?
Tough question, tough question, but I'll give it a shot. I think it is starting to look at the issues that we currently face in the country. For instance, there's the issue of unemployment is one that we're all aware of. That is perhaps something that can be done in that kind of format, where there is something or a body that comes together in the format of a solidarity fund. And it would be great to come, I'm aware of the presidential youth employment initiative due to some of the other work I do. It would be amazing to get that initiative perhaps bolstered with a more significant presence of, and formalized perhaps business presence alongside maybe labor and civil society. And just say that this is the one thing that we are all focusing on. It could as well be education, because the impact of COVID on education has been debilitating. I think it's really broken it.
Well, education needed to be broken because it was, I mean, every survey, I've just been recently looking at lots of the data, and every survey in the world, if we're not rock bottom, we're in the bottom 5 or 10% of any survey done in education in the last 5 years. It needed to be broken, and perhaps this is the opportunity that COVID brings. It says we need to restructure this thing and need to resurrect it in a brand new format, because fundamentally it wasn't working, and now it is being properly dismantled, and kids are going to school for 2 and 3 days a week. And you know, that sort of stuff is a shambles. So many people feel helpless, Tandi. I know I said last question, but last question. So many people feel helpless. And I think what the Solidarity Fund has done more than anything else, other than raising the money and buying the PPE equipment and doing the good work that it did, what it did was provide a rallying point and provide something to do. There was an action that could be taken. The sense of hopelessness that exists in society, again, amplified in those July riots where, you know, it started slowly and then snowballed, and before we knew, large parts of KZN and parts of Gauteng were on fire, and it felt like Armageddon had finally arrived. It's almost as if it was inevitable and now it's happened. And that sense of hopelessness and helplessness is what is so debilitating. Surely, if the Solidarity Fund has done one thing, it has taught us that actually it's not hopeless, that collaborative effort can make a difference, and properly directed can continue to in the future.
No, absolutely, Bruce, absolutely. And I'll go back to the point that I was making, that in the spaces that you are in, and literally this is on an individual basis, if the only people you influence are your mother and father or your kids, and wherever you are, you actually can make such a huge difference just by behaving in a way. There is an answer here. I have an answer. There is a possibility of framing an answer together. Let's work on it and let's see what the possibilities are. I think where helplessness and hopelessness sets in completely is when there is absolute despair and there is nobody saying, I see a bit of light. I can lead towards that light, no matter how small that light is, but I can see that light. And so it's important for each one of us to just say, I do have a bit of power. I do have something that I can do that can make a difference. I mean, one of the things that has always amazed me, Bruce, is that amongst very poor people, when there is hunger, they will share. So certainly between you and I, we have more than half a loaf to give. Whatever that half a loaf looks like, whether it's time, whether it's a hug, whether it's a smile, just encouragement. We can, each one of us, do something. We really can.
Tandi Nzimande, thank you very much indeed. Amongst so many things that she does, she is the Chief Executive of the Solidarity Fund. Tandi, thank you for your time today. Gustav, back to you.
Thank you, Bruce and Tandi, for that very insightful and sincere conversation. Tandi, your career journey and vision for hope serves as an inspiration to all of us. It's very uplifting to hear about people and organizations that are proactively making a difference in society. We wish you well in your leadership role at the Solidarity Fund and look forward to the continued positive impact of the fund and society at large in response to the COVID-19 pandemic in South Africa. A skilled and trusted financial advisor can be invaluable during these uncertain times. They can provide objective insights and help you consider alternative scenarios so that you can make considered, rational decisions on your wealth and insurance portfolios. If you have an advisor, I encourage you to engage with them. And if you don't, please get in touch with us. We welcome your feedback, so please communicate with us. And be sure to register for our next exciting speaker in the Think Big series.